Here we are again. Early winter, wind, cold, sun breaking out. So what do you expect? Now, I'm interested in tactics as far as elections are concerned, because elections are one of the few times that people actually take note of what's happening. We seem to be in this trough where most people believe or think or want to believe that all they have to do is vote every 3 years, and that's all they need to do as citizens. Now obviously we've got a different mentality. We think it's what happens in between the 3 years that's important, but what's also important is what happens during elections, because that's one of the few times that representatives have to justify their position. Now, although most voters vote in a similar fashion, we have seen an increasing number of people move away from the major parties. And obviously they move away for a variety of reasons. And the main is that they're dissatisfied with the political agenda or the social and cultural situation they find in. Now, elections are exceptionally expensive businesses. All those federal independents who got into power, the new ones, needed at least $1 million to conduct their campaign in one electorate. And we saw a lot of money splashed around during the federal elections. State elections are a little easier because the number of people in each seat in the lower house are smaller. You're normally dealing with about 40 to 50,000 people, not 100 to 120,000 people. So you can conduct a concentrated campaign if you have the resources and the people, and the key word is the people, in a particular electorate. Now, a lot of people think that the state government in Victoria is some type of reformist government. The state government in Victoria has been little more than a pro-corporate, pro-business government. And everything it has done during its tenure in office, apart from some social issues, have been directed at maintaining the status quo and expanding the status quo. And they have moved away, the Australian Labor Party in Victoria has moved away from a reformist Labor Party position to a pro-corporate, pro-business position. And now a lot of people say, well, the Labor Party is now in power federally, and in most states you should give them time to develop their own agenda. The problem is that the agendas which are pursued at the state and federal level have very little to do with what's needed. Now, I think we've reached a stage where we need to be involved in state elections, and the Victorian state election is the one I'll be familiar with at the end of November, where we re-establish fundamental policies that have been partially implemented in the past, which are no longer part and parcel of the current political agenda. And the policies I'm talking about are pro-public health, pro-public housing, pro-public education, pro-community public partnerships, and against privatisation and public-private partnerships. Now obviously there are many social issues outside these economic factors, but these are issues which will continue to be discussed. Unfortunately, during state elections, especially state elections, we see little constructive criticism regarding government policies. Now, the This government, the Victorian state government, has been involved in a number of policies which have increased the power of the corporate sector in the construction industry and other industries. They've privatised the Titles Office, they've privatised Melbourne Port, they've privatised part of the Road Traffic Authority, they've privatised many aspects of the so-called public health system, and government departments are little more than departments which give out contracts to private corporations and private companies to carry out state activities. And nothing highlights this more than the public housing fiasco that has occurred in Victoria as the government has moved away from public housing to a pro-community affordable housing sector, which is nothing more than supporting the private sector, not only in terms of ownership of public housing, but in terms of creating private-public partnerships which are 90% in favour of the private sector. So we've basically seen a dearth of public housing in this state, although the revenue from stamp duty on the sale of homes will be over $8 billion this financial year. So there are major issues, and unfortunately you won't see any of the major political parties promote those issues. Now, a lot of people believe that the Premier Daniel Andrews in Victoria finds himself in a position where he will be personally re-elected in his electorate of Mulgrave. Now, although there have been some changes to the boundaries of Mulgrave, it stretches between Ferntree Gully Road and Heatherton Road in North Dandenong. The issues in this electorate and other electorates, many other electorates around the state, are the same. Access to public health, access to public education, access to public housing. These are the fundamental issues. Renewable energy, not centralised renewable energy, but renewable energy based on community-public partnerships. So I'm seriously thinking about launching a challenge on a pro-public health, public housing, public education, community-public partnerships in Daniel Andrews' electorate. A proper challenge. Not a lukewarm challenge, but a challenge which would involve leafleting, door knocking, public meetings in that electorate to raise those issues. Because nothing focuses the government attention than a political campaign in its heartland. During the last state election in Victoria in 2018, our campaign for public housing, our 10-day occupation of the steps of the Victorian Parliament House, did have dividends in terms of the state government promising to build 1,000 new public housing units. And that was the key. Although they haven't spent 1 cent even planning, the fact is they were forced to make that promise. Now, I'd like to make it very clear that any campaign I'll be launching in Mulgrave will be as an independent candidate. And as an independent candidate, what I will need is support, not just financially, but more importantly, with feet on the ground. And that's the key. That is the key to being a challenge. Now, the fact that we have a preferential system means that even a 5% vote can have a profound impact on that election result, and a profound impact on the agenda which will be followed by the state government when it's elected. Because agendas change as people's attitudes to particular topics change. Now, the current economic issues which are facing an increasing number of Australians, and especially people in Victoria, where housing prices are extraordinarily high, as interest rates increase, will be profound. And if we leave everything to the private sector, we will find that the difficulties that people experience will increase. Because when you have the private sector dominate various aspects of activities which were controlled or by the public sector, you find there is an increased problem as far as profitability is concerned. And profitability becomes the number one task in those situations. So we see every time a private organisation is given a contract to provide a public service, that 40%, 40 cents in every dollar go towards that corporation in terms of running costs and profits. And the problems we've seen in many areas of important public facilities that have been privatised directly stem to that privatisation, the introduction of the public-private sector in areas which are normally controlled by the public. And in the past, because of strikes and occupations and protests, what we have seen is governments at the state, local and federal level intervening in the private marketplace to provide essential services at reasonable costs to the people they supposedly represent in Parliament. And if we don't raise these issues at this state election, in all the different electorates, both the Legislative Council. So in early July, I will be launching this campaign for public health, for public housing, for public education, for community public partnerships in terms of establishing decentralised energy systems, in terms of establishing cooperatives and collectives to create a third arm of the economy. So these are issues which I wish to raise. Now there's a number of obviously fundamental problems. If you, as an independent, if I wish to carry on with this particular project, there's the problem of nomination. People in the Mulgrave electorate nominating me to stand as a state member of Parliament for Mulgrave. There's the problem of financings. You would need at least $10,000 to create some type of campaign. And there's the problem of having people come aboard this particular campaign. Now obviously a lot of people are going to say, well, this is not the right way to do it. Why would you stand against the Premier of Victoria, a Labor Premier? Because the Premier of Victoria has never acted as a Labor Premier. The Premier of Victoria has basically acted as a Liberal Premier. There have been some progress in some areas, even in the area of negotiating a treaty with the Victorian Aboriginal people. Even in that area, we have seen major issues develop. We have seen the government of the day picking and choosing particular groups to act as the legitimate traditional owners of areas. We're seeing many federal court cases fighting against this. As far as public health is concerned, we have seen a disastrous situation, not just because of COVID-19, but because of lack of financing in the public health sector. Public housing no longer almost ceases to exist. No wonder Victoria has the worst statistics regarding not just homelessness, but people trying to access permanent accommodation. And the list goes on and on. So change is needed. And the so-called Labor government needs to wake up that it needs to promote an agenda which assists people. Now obviously there'll be other elements in society that will be going for Mr. Andrews for a variety of reasons. I'd like to make it very clear. I'll make it 100% clear. I have no problems with COVID-19 mandates. As a medical practitioner who's been practicing for 47 years, and as somebody who's been vaccinated now 4 times, I have no problem whatsoever with mandates, especially in the pre-vaccination period, where the only thing that prevented mass issues, health issues, was isolation and mandates. Secondly, there's always rumours and innuendos and conspiracy theories floating around. I have no interest in conspiracy theories, rumours or innuendos. This campaign is based on facts. It's based on the fact that this Labor government, under this particular Premier, has moved away from traditional Labor values. It has embraced conservative, reactionary economic values. It is no longer interested in public housing. Minimal interest it's shown in the disintegration of the public health system. Public education continues to be the poor cousin in comparison to private education in this state. We find that our energy is now totally dominated by the private sector, and the state government has no policies in order to create decentralised energy systems, and the list goes on and on. So, if you are interested in coming aboard this campaign, there'll be an official launch, hopefully in mid-July. We'll launch it in the electorate, and we'll see if there is interest in continuing this campaign. Obviously, if there's no interest, there's no point continuing. There's no point bashing your head against the brick wall if there's no interest. But I think it's important that there are elements in society that are willing to raise these issues, highlight and pinpoint the problems with the current government's agenda. As far as the opposition is concerned, they're a total waste of time. A total waste of time. They've learnt nothing from the federal electoral loss. They've learnt nothing as far as their membership is concerned. They are dominated by extremists, both from the religious right and both from the political right. So in that type of situation, it's important that independents like you and me become involved in the state election to put forward a pro-public health, pro-public education, pro-public housing, pro-community public partnerships, and agitate against privatisation and the increasing number of public-private partnerships which do not deliver the services they promise to deliver. So keep an eye on public interest before corporate interests. Let's get involved. Let's put our feet forward. Let's just do something, not just sit around and complain constantly. You got a choice. You can be a cringing, carping consumer complainer, or you can become involved in action to put the people of this state as the centre of the next state election.